Be fine.
Okay. So I've been lecturing on PRUB-Logic and what we call OpenStrategy here and overseas. And my background is actually science and technology, and then I morphed across into strategy about 20 years ago. But part of the love of my life is developing a regenerative food forest down here in New Zealand. So that's my background, fairly diverse. What I'm hoping people will learn today is to understand a number of topics, and the topics I'm going to go through, and I need to change my reading glasses, why most strategies are ineffective, how project management interfaces with strategies. We're going to look at PRUB, but also BURP and UBRP. We'll look at how do you PRUB your projects, look at orphan results. I'm going to introduce a concept called motivational worth, motivational benefits, which is a little bit different from the traditional sector. We'll look at how to validate strategies using logic, evidence, and worth. And I'm going to look at what I'm calling benefits facilitation. And it parallels benefits realization, but it's significantly different. And that will be towards the end of the show. And I'll touch on a few other elements of PRUB-Logic. Okay, so my approach is that I don't come from a project management background. I come from a strategy and technology background. So I'm typically working with complex strategies. So it might be on climate change or biodiversity or management of a large alpine river catchment, things like that, where there might be hundreds of or even thousands of stakeholders and hundreds of projects. So I developed PRUB-Logic for those sort of large complex strategies, and particularly in these cases, this statement here, the users are not the purchasers. So typically it'll be a government department, local or central government, saying we need a strategy for a river catchment. But the people who are going to implement that strategy are the farmers, urbanites, irrigators, and so on, who live in the catchment. So the purchasers are not the users, and that's the example I'm going to be using throughout this. However, PRUB-Logic also applies if the purchaser and the user are the same, so that if you've got a company asking you to build a machine for them, you build the machine and they use it. So the user and the purchaser are the same. And I'd also developed PRUB-Logic to try and make a connection between project management and strategy, because as you'll see, strategy is pretty vague and fluffy, especially in government departments, whereas project management tends to be pretty rigorous, pretty well pinned down. So the challenge is at the strategy end, not at the project management end. So I like rules. So today's rules, ask brief questions in chat. And as I said before, Merv will bring them to my attention if I miss your question. I'm happy to have longer conversations, Zoom or Teams at a later date. So you can let me know if you want that. If you disagree with me, do challenge me. I'm pretty assertive and I'm 100% convinced I'm right, but I may not be. So do challenge me. And the timing, we've got 3 40-minute sessions roughly. Okay, I'm going to set you a challenge just mentally. Can you describe how the world works in just 4 words? And thinking here in particular, how do humans work? What are the things that they do in just 4 words? And you're allowed to repeat one of those words. Now, this is a pretty close to impossible question to answer, so I'm going to give you my answer to this. That's how the world works. People make stuff and use stuff. Now, I'm being deliberately simple or even simplistic in making that sort of statement, because if I'm dealing with hundreds or thousands of stakeholders, I cannot use the sort of language that is typically used by strategists and project managers. I have to use really, really straightforward language. So just dwell on that concept of make stuff and use stuff. Next time you have a cup of coffee with some colleagues, debate it and challenge it and see whether you think that really does represent how the world works. And here's another question just to think about. Do you actually have a clear meaning for the word strategy? Can you describe strategy in 6 words, 8 words? And again, I'll give you my answer, or an answer that really works for me. And it's this one. It's an action plan and a rationale. And I credit Professor Freek Vermeulen at London Business School for that statement. Now, that statement probably works for everybody. What it doesn't work for is the hundreds or thousands of people I deal with. Even that language is too academic. They prefer a statement like, it's what we do and why we do it. So rationale in this case just means, is your strategy logical? Is it supported by evidence, and is it worth it? But at the end of the day, this is a sort of definition that most people can understand. What are you going to do and why are you doing those particular things? That's plain language that people can understand, and that's what will be the focus of this presentation, is keeping everything as simple as I possibly can. So strategy. If you're going to have a strategy, it's got to be an actual strategy, not just a document that's called a strategy. And I would say 3/4 of the documents I've seen that are labeled strategy are not actually strategies. They're wish lists. If you're going to have a strategy, it's not good enough if it's just in one person's mind. It's got to be written down. It's got to inspire everybody involved in the strategy. So it's got to be documented. It's got to be understandable. And it can't just be full of jargon words. So it has to be simple, and it has to reflect human limits in terms of how much people can understand. And I'll come on to that in just a minute. I don't know if you've had too much strategic planning, but this was a review done by McKinsey back in 2007. And I still quote this because I just love the quotes. So they interviewed chief executives of 30 top international companies. So we're talking the likes of Nike and Boeing and so on. And this is what they concluded. Possibly hard to believe, but in my experience, that is true. And this next quote is one of my all-time favorite quotes. I just love that concept of a mystical hope that something good will come of it. And to me, that is so accurate, especially when I'm dealing with central or local government. Professor Vermeulen also made a few other comments like this. He said most companies don't have a strategy. 9 out of 10 don't have one. And in the public sector, I think it's worse than that. Most companies don't have a rationale for why they're doing what they do, why it will lead to superior performance. So they might have a strategy that says that we're doing X, Y, Z, but they can't justify why that's the best thing to do. And really, a strategy is only meaningful if it actually influences what happens in the organization. And you've probably seen lots of times where the chief exec and senior managers, they go away, they have a retreat, they create a strategy, they come back, put the strategy in the filing cabinet, and nothing changes. And you've probably already experienced that. So just for a bit of light entertainment, these were all quotes from genuine strategies. And just have a skim through those. As you read them, it could be tempted to think that they are useful statements. Every single one of those statements is a complete waste of space. They might be true. We will optimize shareholder value. What's the alternative to not optimize shareholder value? Yeah, right, you're not going to do that. We'll operate so we comply with legislation. Well, good on you, you have to. So that's a pointless statement. We'll operate in a way that minimizes harm. Well, you have to. So all of those statements are a complete waste of time, and yet you will see those sort of statements all through strategy documents. I am going to move on to PRUB in a minute. I just like to make it clear that strategies are worse than even you might think. And so the problem is with the strategy profession, not with the project management profession. So why do strategies not work? And there's several main reasons. One is that strategies are written at different levels, what I call aspirational level, guidance level, and operational. There are limits to what people can absorb and understand. And also there's a general lack of understanding of what organizations actually do. And that goes back to that simple quote I had before, make stuff, use stuff. Okay, let's look at the different levels of strategy. So let's say somebody wants to improve the UK's information system to combat fake news. You know, that's a reasonably challenging high-level strategy. Nested under that might be improve UK's libraries, and under that might be improve the UK university libraries, and under that is the Oxford Library, and then the university's online services. So each of those levels represents a strategy for the people working at that level. So if you're going to develop a strategy, you've got to be really clear what level you're operating at. Otherwise, you're just going to confuse the hundreds of people that are trying to make sense of what you're doing. Okay. Human cognitive limits. Humanly, we're limited, and at my age, I'm increasingly aware of that. So you may be familiar with Miller's law. Miller says people can work with 7 plus or minus 2 ideas in their head. And seriously, I think that's optimistic. I think the answer is more like 3 ideas. And it was interesting during the COVID pandemic that governments all over the world typically only had put out 3 messages, like get vaccinated, wear a mask, and stay 2 meters away from everybody. So they figured that 3 messages was about what most people can cope with if it's verbal. But what about if you've got a diagram? What can people cope with visually? And on the left, you see a very simple little diagram. On the right, you see a slightly more complex one. And I've tested this over and over again with the master's students I work with, is how many boxes of information can they comprehend in a well-designed diagram? And the answer leads to what I call driver's law. People can only comprehend about 15 plus or minus 5 concepts in a well-designed diagram. So the diagram on the left there, people will have a look at it and try and make sense of it. The diagram on the right, they'll turn the page and on to the next issue. It's just too complicated. And while everybody on this webinar is probably highly capable, degree qualified, and you probably can cope with that diagram on the right, if you're dealing with hundreds of members of the public, you're wasting your time if you put that sort of diagram in front of them. So we have to keep it really, really simple. So yeah, I'm just emphasizing that. So in our work, PRUB-Logic or OpenStrategies, we have a principle that says we want to work with the smallest amount of information that has the highest value to the most people. And so everything we do with PRUB-Logic tries to abide by those principles. And we try to do it meticulously and unequivocally. So every word we use, like project, result, use, benefit, and the other words I'll introduce you to, each of those words has been agonized over for a long period of time to try and make sure they are the most useful words when dealing with large numbers of stakeholders. Why do we need PRUB-Logic? Well, if you look at all those words, they came out of a single New Zealand government strategy document. Now, you probably know what every one of those words mean, but if you're dealing with hundreds of stakeholders, that simply doesn't work. You cannot use that many words. And here's another one. A couple of years ago, I did a webinar for 2 project managers in the UK, and I asked them these questions. I'll just let you have a look at that little image in the middle there. So even in a disciplined sector like project management, words like objectives and goals mean different things to different people. So even in this sector, we need better language. So what should strategies actually do? Strategies should improve what organizations do, i.e. make stuff that enables the using of stuff. So this is what we came up with. What do organizations actually do? And it sits inside that middle box. The purpose of organizations is to create assets like products, services, and infrastructure that enable customers or citizens to use those assets to create benefits. And that phrase is represented by PRUB. Projects create results that are used to generate benefits. And that essentially goes back to make stuff, use stuff. And we need to have language as simple as that when we're working with large numbers of stakeholders. This PRUB diagram has evolved somewhat over the years, and I'm just going to talk you through this diagram. Projects create results. You guys know how to do that. That's very straightforward. This little arrow here, you'll see, doesn't go straight from result to use. I've got a curved arrow here because you have to hand your results over to the end users. So the results enable the use. The result doesn't make the use happen. It simply enables it. There's a loss of control by project managers when you hand that use over to someone else to use. The use then creates a benefit. That's fairly straightforward. The benefits motivate and even prescribe the use. So when you know what the benefits are, you can say, well, those benefits are needed to motivate the use, because if the users don't create benefits, then the uses won't happen. And the users prescribe the results. When we know what people are wanting to do, that tells us what results we need to build. And I'm going to explain that as we go through this, because this is the basis of PRUB-Logic. So it's not just PRUB, it's what I call these activation flows. What is the flow between a result and a use? And it's what I call enabling. The result does not cause the use, the result enables a use. And that change of ownership is really important. In many ways, it's a depowering of the project managers, and it's empowering the users. And that has quite profound significance. PRUB-Logic represents physical reality. So projects, results, uses, and benefits are real things happening in the real world. So they're not academic concepts like objectives and goals and outcomes. They describe actual physical things. PRUB-Logic represents the flow of what happens in the real world. Projects create results. Results enable users. Users create benefits. So it's physical reality representing real flows. Yeah, just repeating that. So it's grounded in practical reality. It's a language everybody can understand. I say we've used those words, project, result, use, benefit, hundreds and hundreds of times, and those are the words that people really, really understand. Originally, I had project, result, application, benefit. I thought, well, results get applied. But that implied that the project manager did the applying. And when we changed from apply to use, it totally changed the thinking about how things work. So it got PR as we make stuff, UB as we use stuff. And here's two really, really simple example PRUBStrategies. So on the left, on the first box, we've got a company sustainably manufacturing and distributing their products. The result is that the products are now available at the retailers. The use is customers buy and use them. And the benefits are twofold. The client is happy because they've been able to do something with the products, and the company is profitable. Another one more in the public sector, build a sheltered cycleway is the project. The result is we've got a cycleway. The use is children ride on it, and the benefit is they're safe. Now, these demonstrate unequivocally one key message. Who is it that is creating the benefits here? Is it project managers realizing benefits? Is it project managers delivering outcomes? I think these examples make it clear that it's the users that are creating the benefits. And as project managers, we can certainly influence the users. I don't believe we can control the users or deliver outcomes. Or I don't believe we can realize benefits either. So this is quite a challenge to traditional thinking. So this is what PRUB-Logic led us to. Only users create benefits, which is kind of awkward and inconvenient. Certainly benefits inspire users and results enable users, but only users create benefits. So here we go, just summarizing again. Projects are what organizations do. They make stuff. Results are what they achieve. Uses are what end users do. So they're using stuff, and benefits are what end users achieve. So here's another example. This is creating a library. So here we have 3 projects. One to build the infrastructure. So the result is you've got the infrastructure, but that on its own isn't sufficient. So we've got to fill the library with information, and now we've got infrastructure and information, but that's still not enough. We need to put some librarians in there as well. Now we've got librarians, people use it, benefits to the customers, and the library staff feel happy. So again, I'm giving you simplistic examples to emphasize that it's the use of the library that creates the benefits. So I'm going to put some statements up now, and I want you to see if you can work out, is each of these statements a project, a result, a use, or a benefit? So here's the first statement. Statement of healthier young people due to more walking and cycling. Is that a project, a result, a use, or a benefit? And I'm going to give you the answers fairly quickly. That's a benefit because the focus is healthier people. The second one, replace traffic lights with roundabouts to reduce congestion. So that's creating an asset, it's creating a roundabout. So that sentence is describing a project. The project replaced traffic lights. It's going to achieve less congestion, but the key thing is the project is replacing traffic lights. What about this one? Traffic's flowing smoothly around the new roundabout. So Leela, you're correct. Reduced congestion is the benefit, but that's not how that sentence was written. The sentence was written with replace traffic lights at the beginning. The third one, traffic is flowing more smoothly, that's a use. It's people using the roundabout. Traffic is flowing. It sounds like a benefit the way I've worded it, and this is, I'm being deliberately provocative here. But when you see sentences like that, if you want to say there's a benefit there, then you might change it to say the use is traffic is flowing around the roundabout. The benefit is it was smoother or faster. But the way that sentence is written, the subject of the sentence is traffic is flowing, so that's a use. So, PRUB. PRUB goes in both directions. When you're implementing stuff, it's PRUB. When you're planning, you go in the opposite direction, you BURP. So let's have a look at that. BURP for strategic planning. So if you're doing strategic planning, always start with the uses and benefits, not with the projects and results. And I've run dozens and dozens and dozens of public workshops, and everybody wants to talk about the project. Everybody wants to talk about the solution before they understand what people are wanting to do, what the uses are, what the benefits are. Thanks, Hugo. I agree. Cleaner air and economic growth is part of the benefits. Yep. So PRUB is for implementation, BURP is for planning. When you're trying to convince somebody of the value of your strategy, try and focus on uses and benefits. So if you're running a project, you've got to first understand what your customers or users are going to do and why they want to do those things. And I'm going to come on to the why shortly because it's often very different from what we wish it was. Once we understand uses and benefits, the projects and results are actually quite straightforward to work out. And very often it works best to start with uses, because if uses create the benefits, uses are actually what control the strategy. They have more control than any other stakeholder. And that is scary because we cannot make the users do stuff. We have to enable them and motivate them to do the uses that create the benefits that everybody wants. Here's an example, PRUBStrategy. And this is a fairly earthy one. I lived through the Canterbury earthquake back in 2011. It killed 180 people. I was living up on a hill looking over Christchurch, and when the earthquake hit, I could look out over the city and see these enormous plumes of dust rising from the city. And my heart sunk. I just knew a lot of people had been killed. It was horrible. It flattened about a third of the city. They had no water, power, or sewerage systems, no transport, no supermarkets, no doctors. And so there was an urgent need to sort out a whole lot of things. And the example I'm going to give you is hygienic wastewater management. So this sort of evolved in time, and this is a retrospective description of how the strategy evolved. So step one was somebody said, we're going to have to get portable toilets or chemical toilets to 30,000 homes that haven't got them. And this was an astonishing bit of project management. They got 30,000 chemical toilets into Christchurch homes within about 3 days. And that consisted of several jumbo jetfuls of toilets being brought in from China. So that's the very, very high level PRUB. And look at the use here. Families use the chemical toilets. And the question is that use sufficient? Is that fully describing what's going to happen? And if you think about it, think about 3 days later. No, it's not, because those toilets are going to be full. So the true use is people are going to use the toilet and empty it. But where are they going to empty it? They can't empty it down their toilets because the toilet's not working. So the project managers had to come along and install sewage disposal tanks on the corners of every street so people could empty their toilets into them. And as I said before, this is a fairly earthy story. Because before they had these toilets, people just had to dig a hole in the backyard, and it was an interesting way of meeting your neighbour over the back fence. Anyway, is that use sufficient? They're emptying the chemical toilets. Well, not really, because they needed to empty them into clean disposable tanks. So the project managers had to come along now and empty those tanks in the street. And is that sufficient use? Well, not quite, because people had to clean and sanitize their chemical toilets. But there were no supermarkets, so that people couldn't buy those. Fortunately, the council had bought water tankers in, so we could get water. But the council then had to get chemicals and deliver them to all the homes, and then another project being driven by the use. And is that sufficient? Well, not really, because elderly and frail people couldn't lift these toilets up. So we had to have another project to train reliable people to collect the toilets from the elderly people's place and empty them, clean them, and bring them back so that elderly people could use the toilets. So that's roughly how the strategy evolved. And can you see how the uses dictated the evolution of the strategy? Each time we expanded and understood the use, it made it very, very clear what projects and results were required. So this is simplistic. I could go into much greater levels of granularity about how do you fix the toilets when they go wrong and so on. So this was just used as an example to show you how important understanding the uses is. The uses control the strategy, whether we like it or not. And we cannot control the users. It's quite sobering. Only uses create benefits. And I encourage you to never forget that. And that's probably the most sobering lesson that has come out of our work on PRUB-Logic. So here's some other little questions for you to work out whether they're projects, results, uses, or benefits. So here we go. More cyclists are visiting the town centre to shop in the new shops. Is that a project, a result, a use, or a benefit? So that's a use. People are doing something. They're using the town centre. How about this one? On-site parking is available, making it easier for people to use the shopping centre. So making it easier, that suggests it's doing some enabling. The parking is available, so that's a result. Passengers feel safe when they fly in the new Airbus. So what's the key message in that statement? Is it about them flying, which would be a use, or is it about them feeling safe, which is a benefit? They're absolutely a benefit. I'm sure you got all those right. Right, we'll move on. I'm going to touch on another aspect of strategy. Just have a quick look at that photograph and just say to yourself, what do you see in that photograph? Yeah, it's a pretty picture, isn't it? What are you seeing there? Okay, I'm going to show you the same photograph with a different question. Do you see something different now? What's wrong in that photo? Would you expect an apple on the tree at the same time as blossom? That's just not normal. And yet that's a photo from my garden a couple of years ago. I still don't know what happened. I've never seen it before or since. Something's not right there. Why have I put this up? When I've run these two photos past my master's students, about 90% of people look at the first photo and say, what a pretty picture. About 10% will say there's something wrong there. When I ask the second question, pretty much everybody understands what's wrong. So this comes down to what I call collective wisdom. If you're working with a lot of stakeholders, you've got to ask the right questions. So what did you see when I say, what do you see in the picture? And a lot of people say, I saw a pretty picture, but that wasn't the full story. What did other people see? What's wrong in this picture? It triggered a different brain process. So I love this quote from H.L. Mencken: for every problem, there's a solution that's obvious, plausible, and wrong. So that picture, it was obviously pretty. It was plausibly pretty, but just saying it was pretty was wrong. There was something wrong in that picture. So when you're working on strategies with a lot of people, seek out everybody's ideas, particularly the ideas of the users. If an answer seems obvious, stop and think carefully. Ask questions in different ways. What do you see? What's wrong in this picture? What do others see? Why do they see things differently? Do we need more information? And in my experience, project managers and strategists are experts in the area of projects and results. The users are far more experts in the area of uses and benefits. So don't assume that the project managers and the strategists are the experts in everything. They're experts in their field, and it's essential that we get the experts in the field of uses and benefits, which is the users. So just reminding you, there's no shortcuts. Only uses create benefits. Projects don't create benefits, and results don't create benefits. We're going to touch on a new topic here that comes out of PRUB, and that's what I call orphan results. And I use the word orphan quite deliberately here. So in an ideal world, projects create results that get used to create a benefit. However, sadly, a lot of projects create results that never get used. And I deliberately call them abandoned orphan results, because I'm trying to get a message across to the people that run these projects that you're abandoning your beautiful child here. So that language is deliberately emotional. And I had a conversation a number of years ago with one of the directors of Pricewaterhouse in London, PwC. I said to him, I think about 15% of public sector projects produce results that never get used. And he challenged me. He said, no, you're completely wrong on that. He said it's at least 40%. So his view in the public sector is that 40% of projects produce results that barely get used, don't even appear in the public. They just produce a report that goes into a filing cabinet. However, there's a different type of lovable orphan results, and these are the ones that get adopted. So you might run a project to produce as a result that another project adopts. I deliberately use the word adopt, not use, because the use is out here. So orphan results can get adopted to produce another result that ultimately get used to create a benefit. And here's a simple example. A company's designing products. That's the first project. The result is an orphan result. We've got a whole lot of designs, and you're not going to sell the designs to the public. So the design then gets adopted. Apologies there. The design gets adopted by the production department. They produce the new products that end users use. The end user gets all sorts of benefits because we've made a wonderful product, and the company is profitable. So here's an adopted orphan result. And in many of our projects, there's a lot of adopted orphan results. They're still good things as long as they're adopted. Now, here's a big and complex strategy, and I'm absolutely not expecting you to read all of this, but we will have these slides available to you as a PDF. Merv will give you access to those at the end of this presentation. And you can have a look over here and see how different projects are producing orphan results. So it's very fine print, but this is a very high level PRUB strategy for catchment management. And the first project is about collecting information, and that produces an orphan result of a whole lot of information. That feeds into projects about regulation, that produces a whole lot of information about regulation, that gets adopted into other projects, that produce results that get used to create benefits. So you'll see that orphan results are absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with them as long as they get adopted. And PRUB-Logic gives you a really nice, tidy format for presenting that information. Now, I don't know when you looked at that diagram with your eyes glazed over. I think that's only got about 17 boxes in it. It's not 20 boxes. If that got any bigger, a lot of people wouldn't bother reading it. So that's getting back to the cognitive limits argument. So we're going to have one more question, and then we'll have a 5-minute break, and I can put some more wood on the fire because it's cold down here. So here's a statement: a clean and healthy environment as a consequence of cleaner and more sustainable manufacturing processes. Now that one needs to be read quite carefully, especially that bit about as a consequence of. So a cleaner manufacturing process would be a project. So Leela, well done, that's a result. The environment can be a result or a benefit. So if the statement had said a clean and healthy environment as a result of people using the environment wisely, then this would be a benefit. But the way it's worded, it's a clean environment as a result of a project. So it's definitely a result. Here's one: undertake analysis of traffic congestion reduction options. Your project managers, you've probably done one of those, so that's a project. Citizens are happier because they get to work quicker using the new motorway. So anything to do with happy, healthy, wise is a benefit. Yeah, good on you, Leela and Amber. Yeah, I might have a job for you guys. So we're going to pause now because I'm going to introduce you to a new concept around benefits. And I'm going to talk about 2 different types of benefits. Historically, we just tend to talk about benefits as if they're all the same thing. And in our PRUB-Logic work, we've realized there's 2 different types of benefits: what I call global benefits, benefits to the environment and the general public and to society, and motivational benefits, which are benefits to the individual users. And this has really profound consequences, because you will not get your global benefits unless you have motivational benefits. So I'll leave you to think about that over the next 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll kick on. Okay, see you shortly.
Thanks ever so much, Phil. I'm going to put the timer on my phone here. So here we go from 5 minutes. And yeah, grab a cup of tea, put another log on the fire, and we'll see you back in exactly the same time. I know one or two did show your audio and video. We'll make sure that that's organised perhaps towards the end of the session. Thank you, Will. I know you've transferred your question now into the Q&A, so we'll make sure that we cover that. Maybe we cover that just before we set off afterwards. I can see people-wise, 20 people here, which is absolutely great. That's the sort of number that we wanted coming into the workshop. So brilliant, stick with us. And as Phil said, in fact, immediately after this, I'll make available to you the slides, so you can even study them before you go to bed, or get up if you're in Phil's case for your day. And also a worksheet. I'll make sure that that's available. And of course the survey with the PDU code. So that will all be available at the end of the evening. Yeah, keep the chat going as well. Thank you, Layla, for getting the logic. I think you are demonstrated by your answers to the PRUB questions right every time. Something else people might want to look at. Let me just copy the chat. So that's a link to the webinar library where you can see what will be covered in the webinar and the concepts that Phil's actually building on here. So please take a look at that as well. That fire burning brightly then, Phil?
Yes, it is. And fortunately, it's not quite as cold as it has been lately. We've been having some pretty severe frosts, but I don't think it's frosty out there this morning, which is a nice change.
Yes.
In fact, I was out in the garden the other day, and we've got the first blossom on the peach trees. I suspect it'll get frosted off, but it is a first indication of spring, which is satisfying. The birds are starting to build their nests. We've had about 37 different varieties of birds or species of birds at our place, so it's a great place to live.
Yeah, I can vouch for that, Phil, having visited you some years ago now and seen that garden as it was just beginning to develop. But yeah, fantastic. It's kind of getting a head round, okay, we're towards the end of our working day and doing this in the northern hemisphere, and there you are, the southern hemisphere, completely opposite time of day, opposite season, and we're in the same place. I still find it kind of mind-boggling when you start to think about it. But, yeah, that's great. So we're getting some really good interaction. I wondered whether you just wanted to kick off with that Q&A and then go back in. Do you see that Will's put in there about, shall I read it out to them?
If you could read it out, because as I said the other day, if I switch to Q&A, it tends to do something funny to my slide. So what's the question, Merv?
Just not to complicate things, but aren't uses potentially creating unintentionally or not disbenefits or negative outcomes?
Yes. There you go. Is that easy?
Do.
Yes, I do. And the way we handle that in PRUB-Logic is that we enter all our benefits as positive, but we create a negative link between a use and a benefit. So let's say a result was a new hydro dam on a river. So that has a positive impact on the use of people using electricity. It has a negative impact on fish swimming freely in the river. So we handle negativity through the linkages, but projects, results, use and benefits, we always word in the positive. And we found that that is most effective. If I'm running a workshop and it is clear that negative benefits or disbenefits are appearing, then we try and get the stakeholders to resolve it between them. And it's been interesting. I've been running workshops on climate change, particularly relating to water. And in the same room, I've had farmers irrigate, particularly dairy farmers. I've had members of Greenpeace. I've had city councillors and so on. If they focus on each other as individuals, they have arguments. If they focus on projects, results, uses and benefits, they're able to look at the use, because the use is a depersonalized thing. It's simply an action. And so with PRUB, we try not to talk about the users, we talk about the uses.
Yes.
Safer way of talking about issues, because then the farmer can say, I want to use water in this particular way. And other people can say, I acknowledge that you want to do that use. You're not having to acknowledge anything else about the farmer. You're just acknowledging that they want that use. And the greenie will say, I want to swim in the river. And the farmer can say, I acknowledge that use. So then you put those two uses side by side and say, can we find a way of making both those uses happen? And you'll find the farmer and the greenie will then are able to talk about the uses without being at each other's throats. So that's one of the strengths of PRUB, is it depersonalizes.
Yeah, that's really powerful.
Time as you want to implement it. Yeah.
Yes, it doesn't just sweep the disbenefits under the carpet, which often tends to be done because they're inconvenient. It, they are recognised as, as the consequence of uses. So.
Yep. And if you don't address your benefits, then your strategy will probably fall apart. They have to be produced. But PRUB provides a really, really neat, succinct structure for having those conversations. And, I've done dozens and dozens of large workshops with people who came into the room heavily conflicted, and they went away able to talk about the issues. It really does work.
Okay.
I'll go into this concept, if you're okay, Move, of
that's great. Please do.
Global and motivational benefits, because I'm very aware that project management and the Institute in particular are very keen on benefits realization. Benefits are essential. And what I'm talking about is looking at the extent to which project managers can influence or realize or deliver benefits. It's not arguing whether or not benefits need to be realized. It's a case of who can do that. So global benefits, I use that phrase to mean benefits to society and the environment. So as Hugo popped up before, a cleaner atmosphere, things like that, cleaner, yeah. Motivational benefits, I use that phrase to mean benefits to individuals. And I'm using the words global and motivational very deliberately. Again, we've tried all sorts of different words. To be grammatically consistent, I should probably call them global benefits and local benefits. But the word local doesn't capture the concept of motivational, which turns out to be absolutely crucial, as we will now have a look at. So we can have these two types of benefits, and this is really, really important. But not only do we need to know what the benefits are, how they're described, we need to know what they're worth. Now, the project management industry tends to use the word value. I use the word worth, and that is very deliberate. Because if I'm working with stakeholders, they don't say to me, oh, I got great value out of that. They say things to me like, hey, it was worth it, or it wasn't worth it. So the language out in the world is worth, not value. You can dwell on that one and you won't all agree with that, but that's the experience I find. The other reason I use the word worth is that the word value is very often confused with the word values. And I'll come on to what values are later on. So I use the word worth. What is a benefit actually worth? And so that leads to global and motivational worth. The net global worth, I'll let you read that. Over and over again, I've seen cost-benefit analyses that they put a value on the benefit and they compare that with the cost of the projects. And that is inadequate, because very often the cost of the uses is greater than the cost of the projects. It really has to be taken into account. So true net global worth is some sort of value placed on the benefits, and we can talk about that at length, divided by, or from that you subtract the cost of the projects and the uses, and we need net global worth. Net motivational worth is the worth of the motivational benefits. is each stakeholder getting enough worth from doing the use in order for them to keep doing the use? Because if the uses stop, everything falls over. So motivational worth, it can be economic, social, environmental, or cultural. And sometimes we try desperately to put an economic value on everything. End users don't do that. And very often, end users, the least thing they're interested in is the economics. That for many end users, economics are a means of achieving social worth, environmental worth, and cultural worth. So they really focus on those last three words. Economic is a means to an end. It's not the end for a lot of end users. And yet so often we put an economic value on the benefits because that may mean a lot to the purchaser or the sponsor. But that is not what motivates end users. Motivational worth, in other words, the worth of the benefits, can only be accurately defined by the users. Now, as project managers or sponsors, we might imagine what something is worth to an end user, but you have to ask them. And particularly around cultural worth, you may not use that concept in the UK or elsewhere, but here in New Zealand, cultural values mean a lot. So, for example, our Indigenous Maori people have a principle that says that the earth is like a human, and so alpine water is like the blood of a human, lowland water is like the waste produced by a human. So therefore, they have a cultural principle of do not mix alpine water with lowland water. Now, you can't put an economic value on that. That is simply a worth, a value to Indigenous people. So the idea of always working out worth as economics really misses the point for a lot of end users. So cultural worth may mean more to an end user than anything economic or environmental or social. So users need sufficient motivational worth. Uses will not happen and global benefits won't be created unless your results enable the uses and the users receive sufficient motivational worth. And that's really awkward and unavoidable. If your users aren't getting motivated, everything falls apart. So somehow, as project managers, if we want to somehow make sure benefits happen, we have to somehow make sure the users are enabled and motivated. And there's a limit to how much we can influence those things. So don't forget this, your global benefits, your clean air, and all the things that your government sponsor wants from your project, they cannot be achieved unless the users receive enough motivational worth to actually do the uses. And that's really sobering and can be utterly debilitating if you aren't convinced that the users will come along and use things. I'm going to just jump sideways slightly and look at how do you validate a strategy? And in PRUB-Validate, we use three concepts. Anybody can write a strategy and a document and call it a strategy. It's not a strategy until it's been validated. So what does that mean? So PRUB-Validate, a strategy's got to pass three tests. The first one is it logical? Can you represent the concepts that you're working on as a sequence of project, result, use, benefit? And that's usually fairly straightforward. Secondly, will it definitely work? Where's your evidence that the project will create the results? Where's your evidence the results will be used and they will create the benefits? We need that evidence. And thirdly, is it worth it? And I've just been discussing global and motivational worth. So let's get into that in a wee bit more detail on PRUB-Logic. Is it logical at the highest level? Can we take the initiative and put it into a PRUB sequence? So here's a very, very high level PRUB sequence on river catchment management. So we're going to develop, and this is, each of these so-called projects encapsulates many, many, many projects in a single box. We're going to do a whole lot of stuff, produce results that people use and the environment uses, and everybody's happy because we've got wonderful catchment management. So that's the ultimate high level. And we say, okay, yep, logically, that makes sense. The next step is to put that into a little bit more detail and expand on what we mean by that high level statement. And this shows theoretically how projects link through to results, uses, and benefits. And 15 to 20 boxes, and this is the diagram I showed you before, that essentially represents, provides more detail on the catchment management. And again, you don't need to read it, but that's the sort of second level. But that's still just a theoretical statement. How do we know it's true? This is where we get into evidence. So PRUB represents what we'd like to have happen. We need to add evidence to be ensured that it really will happen. So evidence validates the links in the strategy. So here it is. Here's our PRUB sequence. The evidence sits on these linkages. So do we have evidence that a project will create a result? Do we have evidence that the users will be sufficiently enabled by the results? Because if you haven't got that evidence, you don't have any confidence to go ahead and implement your strategy. So just expanding on that, evidence describes the cause and effects. Did the project cause the result? Did the result enable the use, and so on? It's not just data or facts or numbers. It's got to have a causal element to it. And it confirms whether or not projects create results, results enable users, users create benefits, and the benefits motivate users. We need evidence for each of those steps. And you look at all the linkages in this diagram, and some of these linkages are dotted, and that's quite deliberate because these are the spaces where it's really hard to find evidence. Where's the evidence that this fourth result really will be adopted by the project? Where's the evidence that these two results really will be used? So evidence around users is the hardest evidence to find, and it's the most important evidence to find. Because as project managers, you've got evidence that you're experienced enough to run a project to produce a result. It's the evidence of the users is the hard bit. And evidence, and this is getting a little bit academic, I thought I'd better have a wee bit of academic stuff in here. Evidence comes in 4 different forms: causal, enabling, motivating, and prescribing. So projects cause results, results enable and catalyze users, results enable, so there's a different type of evidence. Users cause benefits, benefits motivate users, and users prescribe results. So to be confident that your PRUB strategy is going to work, you need all of those pieces of evidence. And so often I've heard people say, oh, we've got a strategy, and somebody will say, where's your evidence? And the question is, which evidence are you referring to? We need every piece of evidence to have confidence that a strategy is going to work. And I've just put this last bullet point in 24 hours ago because I realized that to some extent benefits prescribe or dictate the uses. I won't discuss that at length here, but I'm happy to discuss that offline. Okay, how do you know if your strategy is really worth it? That's the third part of validating a strategy. And it's this stuff I discussed before. Is there a net global worth, and is there sufficient motivational worth that the users really, really will happen? And as I said, worth is economic, environmental, social. So PRUB validates, validating a strategy, it's got to be logical, you've got to have robust evidence, and it's got to be worth it. And again, I've come back to this statement, which is a relatively new aha moment for us, that you're not going to get your global benefits unless the uses happen, and the uses won't happen unless the users get motivational worth. And that's pretty sobering. So PRUB validate, is your strategy logical? Is it evidence-based? And is it worth it? So that leads to this question, and Merv's going to pop in with one of his Menti questions here.
Okay.
I realise that this is a challenge to the project management arena. Can project managers deliver or ensure or realize benefits? And Merv's going to ask the question, you've got three options, yes, no, or G, which means give me more time to think about it. So if you could start popping your answers into Menti and just see what you think about this.
So there's a number of ways in which you can do this. The easiest is using that Menti tab on the far right of your sidebar there. Yes, no, or give me more time to think about it. Or you can use the QR code that's there, or in fact, can be clever, I think, and pop the link into chat. But I guess why wouldn't you use the Menti tab to do that? So there we are. Information coming in, potentially up to 25 people. We haven't got that many responses, but we're about halfway split at the moment. Can project managers deliver or ensure or realize benefits? Slight movement towards no. Oaksy, Martin, we can see you on camera. So if you want to say anything or whatever, but I may remove you and have you come back later. I'll do that. Phil, did you want to comment on what you're seeing?
I can't see the answers yet, Merv.
Oh, can you not? Right, hang on, let me just... So I'm sharing my screen as well as you sharing yours.
I might need to go off stop sharing.
Have you stopped sharing? Yeah. Do you see it now?
Yes, I can.
I think you've got some work to do, Phil.
Yeah, I know, I get that. And okay. I realise that the question is challenging a very, very, very long-standing concept of benefits realisation. And I'm going to shortly talk through benefits facilitation as a variation on that theme. So I appreciate the honesty of the answers. That's good stuff. I'm not going to make any judgments about them whatsoever, but I will come back to my presentation now, Merv. So thank you, everybody, for your answers.
Just before that, Phil,
yep.
And we can go back. There is one question in the Q&A, and I think I can be clever enough and highlight it on the screen. Can you see that? It's from Steve. Can worth or finding what people see as worth be useful in change management?
Yes. And I will come on to a quick discussion of success shortly. And I think this is very important because it allows the introduction of perceptions rather than hard, cold facts. What people perceive as worth will be what motivates them. And so we do need to allow perceptions and subjective judgments into the system, even though many of us would prefer things to be measured objectively. So I think I'll address that under the heading of on my slide about success.
Okay.
So Merv, I don't know what happened then, but I've lost my ability to share. Can you just reverse the last step you took?
Well, I've unshared my own.
Oh, there we go.
So
I can see share now. Okay.
Yours, so overly complicated, I suspect. I'll just check you're okay, and then I can drop off again.
Can you see my slides again?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Okay, so moving on then. Right. So in my view, I'm going to be bold and say I don't think you can deliver or ensure or realise benefits outcomes. I think you can certainly influence them. But the words realise and ensure, I think, are too strong because only uses create benefits. So this is why, as I've said repeatedly, we need to understand uses and benefits to the nth degree. So strategies only work if users choose to use the results. And, most uses are voluntary. We cannot control them. And in my business, I have some colleagues who are very much into open source software, and they told me I had to stop using words like manage and control, and I had to replace them with words like facilitate and enable. And I've had to do that, and it hasn't been easy for me as a white male engineer to change from words like manage and control to words like facilitate and enable. But when I'm working with a lot of people, I have to use that more general language. So as I said, users are motivated by motivational benefits, and users are enabled and catalyzed. So the words we have to get used to using are motivated, enabled, and catalyzed. I won't go into catalyzed in this presentation. That can be part of a further discussion. So I'm going to give you some more little tests. Is this a project, a result, use, or benefit? And just to let you know, at the end of this presentation, I'm going to give you some homework if you want to do it. If you want to create a little PRUB strategy on a topic of your choice and send it to me for review, I will review it and send it back to you. So you can get an opportunity to practice prubbing after this webinar. So the key focus of this, young people are exercising, so that is very much a use. Build a car park. Anything with a word like build in it is a project. Night classes are available. So that's a result. The classes are there to enable people to learn. Okay, this question about success, I think, is really important. And this was actually, this slide was triggered by a conversation I had with Dave Garrett, who's the senior advisor to the chief exec of PMI over in Maryland. And I was saying previously to Dave that if a project result use benefit sequence met all its targets, that was success. And he challenged me on that very, very correctly. And that led me to producing this slide. So in a hypothetical PRUB strategy, imagine if each project result use and benefits has got targets in it. And let's say 20% of the targets, sorry, 20 of the targets were achieved 80% or better, 9 targets were achieved 50 to 80%, 6 targets were achieved 50%. What is success? And it became very, very clear that success is a subjective analysis, whereas meeting targets is objective. So if most of the global benefits were achieved, then a purchaser is likely to declare success. If most of the motivational benefits were achieved, then users are going to declare success. And if 7 targets were really important to one particular stakeholder, then they would declare success. So the success or even worth is subjective. And that's kind of awkward because I like things to be black and white and objective. But the reality is that even when we have the most rigorously structured strategy, at the end of the day, the stakeholders are going to judge its success subjectively. Ideally, when they do that, their subjectivity will be influenced by the objectivity of whether we achieved the targets in the project's results, uses and benefits, and particularly whether we achieved the targets in the benefits, because for me, that would be success. But we have to accept that not all our stakeholders measure success the same way. So I hope that makes sense, that subjectivity, unfortunately or awkwardly, is very important to a lot of our end users. So logic objectively identifies the achievement of targets. It must make a value judgment about success. Success is a stakeholder-specific value judgment. It is ideally, not always, linked to the achievement of targets. And whether we like it or not, we just simply have to accept that. It's awkward, but it's true. So Merv, here's another question, and I'm changing the topic slightly. Here's a couple of questions for you. Would you like to be able to pay your taxes online is one question. An alternative, would you use an online tax payment system? There's a lot of background noise there, Merv. I don't know what that is.
I really don't know. I thought it's quiet now. Ian's pointed out a couple of times.
Okay.
Not sure.
Away.
Is it?
It was scraping noise. Yep.
Okay.
So would you like more cycle paths versus the question, how and how often would you use them? So there's a very significant difference between those questions. Look at each pair of questions. Is question 1 going to generate the most useful information, or is question 2 going to generate the most useful information? So move back to you to see what people's responses to that are.
Okay, if they can pop into Menti, Phil, I think you're going to have to stop sharing your screen so that they can see the results of what they vote on. So still waiting for votes.
So the question is, which of those questions is going to generate the most value?
Got a few responses coming in now. Not sure how many responses we're going to get, but they're coming in now, so you can see the majority at the moment are in favour of the second question.
Mm-hmm.
Should we go straight on, or did you want to comment on that, or should we go on to the next one?
If you go on to the second question.
Yeah, let's do that.
I'll just talk about that second story a little bit. After the Christchurch earthquakes, the council had a little public engagement exercise called Share an Idea, and they got over 100,000 ideas, and the most popular idea that people wanted was cycleways. So the council's building lots and lots of cycleways.
Right.
Fortunately, they're not being used very much because the council assumed that people wanted the cycleways. However, if you ask people, do you want to use the cycleway? A lot of people said, actually, I want to keep driving to work because everybody else is using the cycleways. So we need to know, will people genuinely use something, which is a question about uses, or do they just want something which they don't need to take any responsibility for? And I'm just going to share my slides again here, Merv. Share. So hopefully you can see my slides there. So this comes on to this difference between wanting or doing. When you ask people, what do you want? They think about what you can give them, and they don't take much responsibility for the answer. If you ask people, what do they want to do? They have to think internally about themselves. They take responsibility for the answer. So asking people about what do you want, that's asking about results. If you ask them what they want to do and why, you're asking about uses and benefits. And that is far, far more valuable. So whenever we do stakeholder engagement, we no longer ask people what they want. You just get endless wish lists of things that they want you to give them, but they don't want you to raise their taxes. Ask them what they want to do, and you get much, much more valuable information. Just another jumping sideways slightly, if we look at the different levels of strategy, very high level strategies tend to talk a lot about uses and benefits. Operational strategies talk about projects and results, and what I call guidance levels tend to operate in the middle there. And I could expand on that if anybody wants to discuss that at a later stage. I'm just going to quickly touch on values and principles. And these are often confused. People sometimes think that values and principles are strategies. So here's a set of values: transparency, integrity, honesty, clarity, respect for Indigenous rights, and so on. Values are important for guiding a strategy, but they are not strategy. And yet over and over again, you'll see wonderful statements about transparency and honesty and clarity in strategy documents, pretending that those are the strategy. No, they're not. They're just a set of value statements. And they say nothing about how you're going to implement those. And that brings us to what we call principles. So principles are the rules of behavior that align with the values. Principles are also important, but they're not strategy. And here's some examples. So you might have a value on the left, Maori values about alpine water. That's just a value. The principle, in other words, the behavior that would represent that is don't mix alpine and lowland water. Similarly, you might have a value like transparency, which is a good thing. That's not very helpful unless you've got some principles to go with it. So one principle might be all strategy meetings and supporting documents will be in the public domain. There'll be widespread consultation with stakeholders. So those are the big behaviors or the principles that implement the values. Now, the value sustainability, it's a very popular one. Doesn't mean much unless you have a statement that says all decisions will consider their impacts on future generations, the next 7 generations. And that's just an example of a principle that you might apply. Integrity, lovely statement. What does it mean? And we often use the decision, all decisions will pass the front page test. In other words, whatever decision you make has got to cope with being on the front page of the newspaper. So values and principles are not strategies, they guide strategies. They're important, they don't describe the action plan and rationale, they can't be implemented, they are not strategy. So when creating a strategy or a PRUB-Logic strategy, separate your values from the actual actions of the strategy. Benefits facilitation. I think this would be a really good point to have another 5-minute break, because this benefits facilitation is a process that I think could replace or sit alongside benefits realization. And when I look at the concept of benefits realization, and when I look at how people describe the process of benefits realization, that process to me looks like facilitation. It doesn't look like realization. It doesn't look like controlling the creation of the benefit. It looks like facilitating the creation of the benefit. So I just think that the word realization is not quite the right word. I think facilitation is a better word. And so in 5 minutes' time, I'll run through how we would do benefits facilitation using PRUB-Logic. And I'll be interested in your feedback on that, as whether the traditional use of realization actually means facilitation. So I'll see you in 5 minutes. You still there, Merv?
Eventually. I've had some challenges. My computer froze for some reason. So, and now I'm back. My background looks pretty blurred. So I've got some sorting out to do, but I am here in spirit.
Okay, well, I'll be back in about 4 minutes.
Yeah, okay, the show will go on. Excellent.
Hello. My sound is still on.
Okay, I'm back. Hopefully my computer problem's resolved. Phil, I think I muted you while you were away, so...
Okay, should be back on now.
Yeah, and hopefully my machine's going to work all right now. I had to reboot it. One of those things, but... We were talking about your network a little earlier, weren't we? And now you're on a kind of super duper Starlink network, I think you said, to resolve various gremlins that we had.
It's one of the problems of living in the country is that, our wireless broadband was pretty pathetic.
Yeah.
I think it had an upload speed of 1 megabyte per second, whereas now I'm on about 39 megabytes upload, so it's a bit better.
Yeah, it's certainly impressive. There is a question that's come in, so before we get going, Martin, who kept appearing on camera, let me just see if I can highlight the message and bring it on there. So Martin, who is a member of our Sustainability Community of Action, shouldn't it be facilitation of uses instead of facilitation of benefits?
That's a good question, and I guess the reason I use facilitation of benefits is because at the moment the common usage of the wording is realization of benefits. So I'm only wanting to change one thing at a time, but that's a fair question, Martin. And in fact, if you want to be really pedantic, it's facilitation of users. But I find the concept of facilitation of benefits, it works for me. It works for a lot of people that I've discussed that with. And while I try to be meticulous and pedantic and unequivocal in the words we use, there's times I have to compromise and use phrases that work, even if they're grammatically not absolutely perfect Oxford English. And so I'm using facilitation of benefits or benefits facilitation. It's not perfect, but I think it's more accurate than benefits realization. But I would say that because I've come up with this idea, I'm more than happy to be challenged on it as we go through it. So perhaps, Merv, I'll reshare my screen and
please do, yeah.
Go through the next bit. Okay. So there we go, benefits facilitation. This is how it works. Now, here is a picture of effectively an empty sub-strategy. I've put in a whole lot of boxes here. In benefits facilitation, the first step I would be recommending is to understand the global benefits. So this is if you've got a purchaser like a government department coming along and say, we need a new motorway or something like that. This is where we need clarity on, okay, so what are the global benefits you're looking for? Now, asking that question, I think, is something that project managers could do, because if you go into your government department, you'll often find they're not actually very good at this stuff. They're not very clear on what the benefits are. They might have made a decision to build a motorway for political reasons. We've got a lot of that going on in New Zealand at the moment. So this benefits facilitation is something I think that project managers can do in conjunction with the purchaser. And step one is to understand the global benefits. What are we trying to achieve at the end of the day? Step two is to then say, okay, what are the uses that will create those benefits? And we have to really, really understand those. And at this stage, we haven't talked about the motivational benefit, because that's the third step. So step two, what do we need people to be doing on the motorway or whatever it is we're building in order to create those benefits, those global benefits? And then we need to say, what's going to motivate them? So not many people are motivated by the global benefits. And this is a classic problem with climate change. Most of the actions that members of the public need to take on climate change do not give an immediate benefit to that person. They create a global benefit. So if we burn less fossil fuel in our cars, so we travel less, do we get a personal benefit or does the planet benefit? So very often the motivational worths are not the same as the global worth, and yet they are absolutely essential because the uses won't happen to create the global worth unless they are motivated. So step 3 in facilitating benefits is to really understand the motivational benefits. And sometimes we may need to introduce another use in order to get all those motivational benefits to happen to trigger the uses to create the global benefits. So now we've got to the point where we're understanding what's going to happen out there in the real world. The next step is relatively straightforward to work out, okay, if those are the uses, what results do we need to enable those uses to happen? And this is back into core project management territory. And I imagine a lot of you are pretty good at doing that. If you really understand how something's going to be used, you can create the result. But of course, the ideal result often can't be afforded. So you may need to come up with a compromised result that produces a compromised use that produces a compromised benefit. So there's a point where we have to look at the whole picture and make sure that the compromised projects that we're doing because we haven't got enough money are going to produce a good enough result that will produce good enough uses to create good enough benefits. So there's a stage here where we have to essentially validate the whole picture. And the next stage of benefits facilitation is core to your business. Get on with it, make the results. And then the final stage is monitoring the uses and the benefits. Are they actually happening according to how we theorized they would happen? And if not, do we need to change the results? Do we need to do a bit more work on the projects and so on? So that process that I just took you through, to me, is what I call benefits facilitation. And to me, it pretty accurately reflects what benefits realization seems to do. But I just think the word realization is too strong. It's implying that the project manager can realize the benefits, and I don't think they can. I think the project manager can facilitate a process that ends up with users realizing benefits or the users creating the benefits. So this is back to another question for Merv, and I realise that this is potentially confrontational to the project management profession that has used benefits realisation for a long time. Merv, there's a lot of clicking going on there. I don't know whether that's coming from you.
It might be my mouse, but there we are. Is it stopped now?
Yep, that's stopped. Okay.
All right. I think it's my mouse that's being captured more than normal, but
okay.
The question.
So I'll leave that question there. What does it seem reasonable to replace the concept of benefits realisation with benefits facilitation? So I'll stop sharing here, Merv, and the question's back to you.
Okay. So you can see but the percentage here, but it's fairly obvious. 8 in favour of yes and 1 in favour of no.
And what surprises me here is I thought there'd be a lot more people wanting more time to think about it, because it is a challenge to traditional thinking, and I absolutely sympathise with the person that says no. I'm hoping that benefits facilitation is actually not that dramatic a shift.
Yeah.
It's a change of word to better describe what I think benefits realisation sort of is.
Yes.
But in going from realisation to facilitation, for many project managers, I think it may come as a sense of relief that you're not actually responsible for the benefit. You're responsible for driving a process that increases the probability of a benefit, but you're not actually accountable for the benefits. And I think that is a healthier space to be. So, Merv, thanks for that. I'll go back to
yeah.
slide.
What I did notice, Layla's been bold enough to identify, so she's the odd one out. Layla, by all means, if you wanted to come up on camera or a bit later, please do. I know you're bold, but otherwise we press on anyway, Phil.
Okay, thanks very much. I will press on at this stage.
Yeah.
And I say I'm not judging anybody's responses, because what I'm proposing is not that easy to accept as such a sudden change to a core part of the project management profession. So I'm now just going to touch on a few other things that PRUB-Logic does. So what I've tried to do with PRUB-Logic is look at all of the things we need on strategies or project management, and I'm hanging them off the same PRUB framework. So I can write more about this. I've got a chapter in my new book about efficiency and effectiveness. So PRUB-Logic says that projects can be efficient, results can be effective, uses can be efficient, benefits can be effective. I'm not going to expand on that here. It's just, as I mentioned earlier, my new book should be published in the next 3 or 4 months, and there's a paper on this subject. This leads to accountability. So across the top of this little picture, I'm just going to change glasses so I can read it myself. I've got project efficiency, result effectiveness, and so on. Now, when it comes to accountability, who's accountable for each of those? Well, there's actually 4 categories of accountability. Who's accountable for deciding what we're going to measure? Who is accountable for specifying exactly what we're going to measure? Who's accountable for delivering the goods? And who's accountable for ongoing performance management? So that actually leads to 16 accountabilities, not just who's accountable. There are 16 accountabilities that need to be addressed. And here's my answers, and this could be debated. P is purchaser, S is supplier, i.e. project manager. So in my analysis, the purchaser is accountable for most of these things. In practice, the project managers get blamed for most of these things. And I'm hoping that this slide is liberating for a lot of project managers. You are not accountable for a lot of this stuff. Your purchaser is accountable for a lot of this stuff. Don't let them hold you accountable for things that you have no control over. I've got a paper on that in my book. Here's another one. I always say, please work out your strategy first and not who does it. Just if you could just read that sentence. So when I run a workshop, I say to the people in the room, can you tell me your name? Tell me what you're interested in. Do not tell me what your expertise is, and do not tell me your position in the hierarchy. Because if somebody says they're the chief executive, everybody stops talking because they think they're going to be overruled. So try and run workshops where you focus on the issues, the projects, results, the uses and benefits, and not who is going to make decisions about them. It's really important. Often the experts know an awful lot about projects and results and almost nothing about uses and benefits. The experts on uses and benefits are your end users. They are as expert in that part of the strategy as the project managers and the purchasers are in projects and results. So everybody in the room is an expert, and we need to acknowledge that and allow everybody's ideas to come to the surface. So create your PRUB strategies before allowing people to identify their roles. And what I find is that by doing that, the experts do what I call earn the right to lead. If you are seen as putting good ideas up all the time, gradually people will defer to you and you become awarded the title of expert rather than claiming the title of expert. Makes a huge difference. Strategy boundaries. the real world isn't a neat, tidy PRUB. It's actually PRUB ad infinitum. So when you're setting up a strategy, we've got to decide a few things. What's the start and finish of your PRUB sequence? And I've got a paper on that. You've got to agree on the level. Are you writing an aspirational, very high-level strategy, or are you getting right down into the details? And what topics are you going to include in your strategy? So after the Christchurch earthquake, are we going to have a strategy on repairing all the infrastructure, or are we just going to focus on wastewater? So when you start a strategy, there's a few starting decisions that need to be made. Right. The environment is always interesting when it comes to large-scale strategy. The environment is a stakeholder. It's an actor. The environment can run projects. So when a river floods and alters the course of the river, that is a project. Fish swimming in the river is a use, and that's the environment in a use. So if you're running large-scale strategies, anything to do with the environment, it pays to have a person or a group of people who act as if they were the environment, and they speak up for the environment. So that's worth taking on board. I'm going to show you some verbs that appear in a lot of strategy documents. None of these verbs can be implemented. Do you recognize any of them? You cannot walk out the door and protect. You might build a fence around a penguin colony, and as a result, the words are protected. The birds are protected, but you can't go out there and protect. There's no action known as ensure. You can do something that ensures a result, but you cannot ensure. You cannot collaborate. You can do something in a collaborative way, but collaborate is not a verb that you can implement, and so on with all of those words. And yet look at those words, those are the words that dominate strategy documents. They cannot be implemented. You can read a chapter in my first book, which was Validating Strategies. Chapter 3 was all about the use and abuse of strategy words. Okay, so those words describe behaviors and they hint at benefits, but they can't be implemented. So here we come to a bit of homework, and this is entirely up to you if you want to do this. If you want to pick an idea, a project you're working on, or a strategy you're working on, if you create a PRUB strategy and email it to me, there we go. I'm happy to give you feedback on it and send it back to you. Merv is going to make a document available to you at the end of it, which is essentially a blank PRUB strategy that you can fill in the boxes. So that's just something, if you want to do that, I'm happy to give you feedback. So I'm just going to do a quick review here. Most strategies fail. Most strategies fail because of the poorly organized information. Lots of vague statements about objectives and outcomes and goals and missions and visions and all that stuff. Lots of obvious statements like we're going to optimize shareholder value. No linkages between the projects and the benefits and so on. So the failures that you're facing are in the strategy profession, not in the project management profession. I love dealing with project managers. You've got your act together. It's when you try and interface with your clients that we have the challenges. The core functions of an organization is create assets and enable people to use them. That's PRUB-Logic. It's a strategy, BURP, and an action plan at the same time, so we don't need separate documents. Here's the core document. Print that out and put it on the wall. That's how the world works. I emphasize this one here, that enable and catalyze. Results do not force uses to happen. You have to hand them over. They only enable the voluntary uses. And the other one that's really important is the benefits motivate the uses. So if you don't have enough motivational worth in the benefits, the uses won't happen and you won't get your global benefits. PRUB validate, a strategy has to be logical, It's got to be evidence-based and worth it. Uses, you've got to understand them, because only uses create benefits. Motivational benefits motivate, uses, results enable. PRUB-Logic describes physical reality. It's not abstract concepts like objectives, outcomes, and goals. They're physical things. They're a project that happens. They're a result. It's a physical thing. Uses create benefits. You've probably heard me say that before. Global benefits dependent on motivational benefits, and uses prescribe results. And then PRUB does lots and lots of other things, as I showed you in those last few slides. So I'm going to leave you a couple of things to think about. What does it mean for you that only uses create benefits? Do you believe that? And I'm challenging you to either believe it or not believe it. I don't think there's a halfway house. And if you believe it, or if you don't believe it, what does it mean if benefits facilitation replaces benefits realization, if you think it should or if you think it shouldn't? Is facilitation just a better word for describing what you do anyway? Or is it replacing realization as a concept? I'll leave that with you. And then, would you like to be able to facilitate benefits? Would you like to be able to help your clients create PRUB strategies that then provide really robust criteria for the results that you need to create, that will enable uses, that will create benefits, that will motivate uses? So there we go. That's the end of what I was going to present. There's contact details there. Merv's going to give you hard copies that, is going to give you a PDF that you can read any of this again later on if you want to. I'm genuine when I say to you, if you want to send your PRUB over to me, I'm happy to give you feedback on it. I would very, very much like to thank Merv. He's been incredibly helpful in helping me, run the workshop and the previous webinar. I've known Merv for many years. He's also been really good at challenging my thinking. At times I feel deeply hurt when Merv challenges me, but so far he's been right with each of his challenges, and I've got over the hurt and I've improved PRUB-Logic as a result. So Merv, thanks very much for your support over the years.
Okay.
And I'm happy to answer
with me. But yeah, I guess, it's, I love this stuff ever since I read your first book, Phil, about validating strategies. And it's such, for me, such common sense, but yet it's not common practice. And I know there's one or two people on the call, like Phil, like Ian,
Yep.
and others. If they wanted to come up on camera or whatever for a bit of a chat, then they are most welcome. We've tried that.
Well, could I just first of all answer Hugo's question about, sometimes a benefit is in contrast to do nothing. And absolutely, a benefit can be preventing something going wrong. So, building a stop bank to stop a river flooding is preventing something bad from happening. So, or preventing further, deterioration. So, yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Okay, that's useful. We've got Layla. Please feel free to debate and comment on feedback on a session. She's on a LinkedIn post. So thank you so much for that, Layla. That's really great.
But likewise, if anybody wants to contact me directly, at any time from now on, email me. We can set up a Zoom or a Teams meeting, because believe it or not, I actually love this stuff, and I enjoy discussing it with people. So don't hold back if you want to chat about it.
Okay, yeah, and I've just put the link in there to the Google Drive where you'll find the slides, as well as that template. I know it's always useful to have the slides, as soon as possible. So they are there. And then what I will do is put the link in for the survey. So the second link, the Menti one, those of you who come to any of the PMI UK webinars will know that we love you to complete the survey, give us your feedback, answer Merv's killer question. What have you learned, or what do you do differently? as a result of attending this webinar? How will you use this information to create your benefits of your own? And then at the end of there's the PDU code. There's two units for this evening as well. So that concludes that. We have finished ahead of time, which is always a good thing. Get some fantastic feedback. If you're able to put feedback at the end of that survey as well, then we'll pass that on to Phil, and we'll use that in some of the subsequent social media LinkedIn posts that Layla's organising for us. So thank you once again.
And thank you very much for those heartwarming comments. I really do appreciate them. It's going to make my day. So thanks. Okay,
we've got a question there in terms of the survey link. Let's just have a quick look. Yeah, the survey link's gone up in the chat, so missed Ian, but maybe if I hit it again, there we are.
Okay. And look, while I absolutely appreciate those positive comments, I learn most when you challenge me. So if you think I've got a word wrong, if you think words like catalyze or prescribe aren't quite right. So I've used the word that suggests that users prescribe results. And in a previous conversation, we used the word dictate, that users dictate results. And I had some pushback from that, especially from a colleague in Germany. So we backed off and we used the word prescribe. But if you've got a better word, I'm still open to that. So yeah, challenging me is incredibly valuable if we're going to improve the way we do things for the future. Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking actually Martin's feedback. So Martin's from Germany, Martin Bertram. Right. You teach into Germany, into Cologne, and it would probably be interesting to get Martin's reflection on this as a very good English speaker, but non-native anyway, to see how some of this terminology lands. But okay, so thank you for that. And we got the numbers that we'd hoped for, 20 plus engaged people on the call. So that's absolutely brilliant. I won't drag things on. I'll let people get an early night. But yeah, thanks again, everyone.
Okay, thank you, everybody, and have a good sleep.
Yes, bye.